Picture the greatest city the ancient world ever built. Now fill it with marble temples and aqueducts that carry water across mountains, and legal codes so sophisticated that lawyers still argue about them today. Add public baths that hold 3,000 people at once, roads that run arrow straight across 5,000 miles of empire, and physicians who have read every medical text ever produced in Greek, Latin, Egyptian, and Aramaic. That's Rome, the eternal city, the centre of the world, a place where you could watch a senator debate philosophy in the morning and eat a dormouse stuffed with pine nuts for dinner, a place with running water and sewage systems and grain shipments so organised they'd impress a modern logistics company. And in this city, in this civilization that considered itself the apex of human achievement, women spent roughly a quarter of their adult lives managing one of the most basic facts of female biology with absolutely no help from the society around them. In fact, the society around them actively made it worse. The doctors thought menstrual blood could kill crops. The priests thought it could defile temples. The philosophers thought it could cloud mirrors with a permanent stain just by looking at them. And the women still had to go to the market, still had to weave the wool, still had to carry water from the fountain, still had to navigate the crowds and the heat and the hills of Rome every single month for 30 years. Welcome back to Henry's History for Sleep. I'm Henry, and tonight we're going somewhere that history books tend to skip over, which is exactly why it's interesting. We're going to ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and we're going to look at the thing that half the population dealt with every single month, that literally nobody important ever thought to write about in any practical detail. Because the people writing were mostly men, and the men had theories, wild, catastrophic, impressively wrong theories, and the women had wool, so get comfortable. I make these history stories, and I genuinely don't know if you listen to them for educational purposes or because hearing about ancient menstrual practices is the specific niche that sends you to sleep. Either way, that's fine. Both are fine. Subscribe if you want. And here we go. Your eyes open to darkness. Not complete darkness. There's a thin line of grey light coming through the gap under the door, and somewhere above you, through the thin boards of the ceiling, you can hear pigeons moving on the roof tiles. Their feet scratch and scrape in small circles, the way pigeons always do, as if they're rearranging furniture that isn't there. The room smells like lanolin and old smoke and the slightly sour edge of bodies that have been sleeping in a small space for too many hours. The wool smell is always first. You live and work above a lanificiaria, a woolworking shop, and the smell of raw fleece and the oily animal grease that comes off it has soaked into the walls so deeply that even in the middle of the night, when there's no one working, you can still smell it. Warm and thick and not exactly unpleasant, but not exactly pleasant either. The smell of work. Below that, the smoke from the brazier that burned last night and is now cold. Ash and char and the faint bitterness of pine resin. And underneath all of it, the smell of this city. Rome in the 3rd month of the year, when the air is cold enough that people are still burning fuel at night, but warm enough that the streets are already beginning to carry the edge of what summer will smell like in a few months. Stone and mud and animal and cooking fire, and the distant sweetness of something baking at the thermopolium on the ground floor of the building across the alley. And then you move, just slightly, shifting your position on the sleeping mat, and you feel it. That specific warmth, that specific wrong feeling. Your stomach clenches, and for one moment you hold completely still, the way you always do in that first second, hoping you're wrong, hoping it's just sweat or the warmth of the wool blanket. You're not wrong. You know even before your hand moves that you're not wrong. Your body has been telling you for 2 days. The drag in your lower back that started the night before last. The way your breasts ached when you leaned over the loom yesterday afternoon. The mood that came over you at the fountain when a woman bumped your shoulder and you wanted to cry, though you didn't, 'cause you never do. You already knew this was coming. It's still a problem. Your name is Valeria. You're 17 years old, and you've lived in this apartment on the Aventine Hill for 3 years now, since your father moved the family here from Capua when he took over the woolworking contract from your uncle who died of fever. You have 2 younger brothers who sleep in the other room, and a mother who is already awake because your mother is always already awake, and a father who leaves before dawn to buy fleece at the market near the Circus Maximus. And right now, in the last hour of darkness, you are lying very still on your sleeping mat and calculating exactly how much trouble this particular morning is going to be. Your first menstrual cycle arrived when you were 14, in the middle of a family dinner which was as embarrassing as it sounds. Your mother had taken you aside afterward and told you what to do in the same tone she used, to explain how to card wool. Practical, brief, slightly impatient, as if this was all very obvious and you should already know it. Your older cousin Tertia had been more helpful. She'd sat with you that night and walked you through the actual mechanics of it. The things your mother considered too obvious to mention, and also the things your mother had simply never thought to question. You know what to do. You know where the wool strips are. You know how to fold them and how to position them and how to change them without anyone noticing if you're in a public space. You've done this every month for 3 years. It's still, every single time, a logistical problem that requires solving before you can do anything else in your day. You ease yourself up from the mat carefully, moving slowly, that particular careful slowness that every woman in the ancient world knows, the careful slowness of not wanting to make things worse than they already are before you've had a chance to manage them. Your feet find the cold stone floor. The cold hits the soles of your feet like something physical, like pressing your palms to ice, and you hold your breath against the gasp of it. The room is small. 3 sleeping mats, a chest against the wall where the family keeps clothing and the things that matter, a small altar in the corner with the household gods, the lares, 2 small bronze figures your grandmother carried from her home when she married your grandfather, their faces worn smooth from decades of touch. You don't light the lamp. You know this room well enough to move through it without light. The chest opens silently because you've learned to lift the lid at the right angle to prevent the creak of the hinge. Inside, under the spare tunics and the winter cloak and your mother's good stola that only comes out for important occasions, there is a smaller bundle wrapped in a piece of old linen. This is yours. It lives here because there's nowhere else for it to live that's private, and privacy is a thing you negotiate in a family of 5 living in 3 rooms above a workshop. Inside the bundle, strips of wool. Old wool, soft from washing and rewashing, broken down by use until the lanolin is mostly gone, and what's left is just fibre, flexible and absorbent. Some women use linen. Some women use what your mother calls a soft sponge, which is exactly what it sounds like, an actual sea sponge, the kind that's fished out of the Mediterranean and sold at the market, which you tie with a cord for retrieval. Your mother prefers the sponge. You prefer the wool strips because the wool you have access to all the time without spending money, and the sponge requires going to the market, and going to the market requires having a bowl or a sestertius to spend, and those are not always available. The wool strips are your solution to a problem that no Roman official has ever thought to solve. No aqueduct delivers what you need, no city law addresses it, no market stall specializes in it. You manage with what you have, and what you have is wool, which fortunately is abundant in a household that processes fleece for a living. You take what you need and fold it quickly in the dark, the way you've done it dozens of times, your hands working without needing your eyes. The fold is specific. 2 layers for thickness, then a third fold to create the right shape, then tucked against your body beneath the long under tunic you sleep in. It's not comfortable. It's never comfortable. It does the job. You stand there for a moment in the dark, taking stock. Your back aches. Not sharp pain, just the familiar grinding drag of the first day, like something is slowly wringing out a cloth at the base of your spine. Your lower belly feels tight and slightly hot, the way a muscle feels when you've overworked it, except you haven't been doing anything to overwork it. Your body is doing this to itself. You've been told that this is good for you. You've been told that this is your body cleansing itself, purging the excess blood that would otherwise corrupt, which is the medical understanding of menstruation in the Roman world, and which is, to put it plainly, catastrophically wrong, but also the best explanation available. The physician Galen, the most important doctor of the Roman world, a man so confident in his own intelligence that he dedicated entire volumes of text to his own correctness, has written that menstruation is the body's way of expelling surplus blood that the female constitution cannot process. Women, he explains, are constitutionally colder and moister than men. They cannot sweat out their excess humours the way men do through physical labour, so instead they expel it monthly. This is why, according to Galen, women who work hard physically, slaves, say, or women who do heavy agricultural work, have lighter or less regular periods. They're burning off the excess another way. This is wrong. But Galen will be considered the definitive authority on human medicine for the next 1300 years. His texts will be copied by monks in medieval scriptoria. They will be the foundation of European medical education well into the Renaissance. A man who has never performed a dissection on a living human body, who based most of his anatomical knowledge on dissecting pigs and apes, will be the primary source of medical understanding for over a millennium. But that's not your problem right now. Right now your problem is that it's not yet full light outside, your back is aching, you have a full day of work ahead of you, and you need to get to the water jar before your brothers wake up so you can wash before the household is moving. You move through the dark to the door. The Aventine Hill in Rome is not the fancy part of the city. The Palatine is where the emperors live, where the great houses have rooms that cost more than your father earns in a year. The Caelian has wealthy merchants and equestrians with proper atria and slaves to carry their water. The Aventine is where people like your family live. Tradespeople, freedmen, small craftsmen, workers. The buildings are tall and close together, 5 and 6 stories of apartments stacked up from the street level where the workshops are, the rents getting cheaper the higher you go. Your family is on the 3rd floor, which means you're not at the very bottom and not at the very top, which means the smell of the street doesn't quite reach you, and neither does the heat of the roof in summer, which is the best your father can manage. The hallway outside your door is narrow and dark. Someone has left a shoe outside the door across the hall, a single sandal, which has been there for 2 days now, and which you try not to think about too hard. There are 6 apartments on this floor, and the building holds maybe 40 people. The fountain is 3 streets away. The public latrina is on the ground floor, which means going down 3 flights of stairs every time you need it, in the dark, carrying a lamp. The water jar is in the kitchen. A small brazier, a shelf with a few clay pots, a low table, the jar of water your mother always fills before she sleeps, because she knows morning water is the first battle of the day. You pour a small amount into the washing basin. The water is cold in a way that feels personal, that specific cold of pre-dawn water that hasn't had any warmth near it for hours. You wash your hands first, then your face, then quietly as you can, what else needs washing this morning? The water is very cold. You make no sound. In the other room you can hear your brothers shifting. The older one, Marcus, 12 years old and already the size of a man but still moving through the world, with the bewildered energy of a child who hasn't figured out which parts of himself to use yet, is starting to wake. You can tell from the quality of his breathing. In 20 minutes he'll be hungry and loud. Your mother appears in the doorway between the kitchen and the sleeping rooms, with the particular silent efficiency she has always had, moving through the apartment without waking anyone the way water moves through cloth, just present and then present in a different place. She looks at you at the basin and looks at the water and knows. She says nothing. She goes to the shelf and brings down the clay pot with the dried herbs, chamomile and fennel mostly, and sets water to heat on the brazier, which she lights with the banked coals from the night before with 3 precise movements. She's 41 years old and has been doing all of this her entire adult life, and you have never once heard her complain about any part of it. That is its own kind of silence, not peace, something closer to endurance. By the time the herbs have steeped in hot water, and she hands you the cup, the grey light under the door has shifted to a pale early yellow. The city is waking up. You can hear it. Feet on the stairs above you, the creak of the apartment door on the floor below, someone calling something in the street, then the creak of the shutter on the building across the alley as someone pushes it open to let in the morning air. Rome does not wake gently. Rome wakes the way it does everything, all at once, in a rush, too many people doing too many things in too small a space. The chamomile is bitter and slightly grassy. The fennel adds a sweetness that doesn't quite mask the medicinal edge. You drink it standing up, one hand on the shelf for balance because your back is aching, and standing still makes it worse, a paradox you've come to accept. And I need you to understand something here before we go any further, because this is one of those moments where the gap between then and now is wider than it first appears. You're 17 years old. You have had your period for 3 years. You will have it, if your health holds and your life proceeds normally, for another 35 years or so, until sometime in your early 50s, though the Roman understanding of menopause is, like most Roman medical understanding involving women, imprecise and filtered through a lot of wishful thinking on the part of men who wrote about it. 35 years, every 28 to 30 days. That's roughly 450 menstrual cycles across the span of your reproductive life. 450 times you'll manage this logistics problem with wool strips and cold water and chamomile tea and silence. 450 times you'll navigate the city and the workshop and the social rules around a body function that everyone knows exists, and nobody is supposed to acknowledge exists. 450 times you'll do the math in your head about whether today is a day you can reasonably go to the temple, or the baths, or the market, or whether the wool strips are sufficient for what today's workload requires, unless you get pregnant, which you will eventually, because this is Rome and you will be married, probably within the next year or two at your father's arrangement, and you will have children, probably more than one. Pregnancy and nursing both suppress menstruation for months at a time, which is the only physiological break from this that your society offers, and which comes with its own considerable difficulties. But right now you're 17 and unmarried, and your mother is handing you a piece of bread and a cup of water, and the city is waking up outside and you have work to do. Your father has already left. He leaves before light, always, because the fleece market near the circus runs early, and if you want the best raw wool at a reasonable price, you have to be there before the middlemen get in between you and the farmers. He'll be back by mid-morning with whatever he could afford, and then the real work starts. Sorting, washing, carding, spinning, the rhythm of a lanificiaria. The workshop is on the ground floor of the building, and also spills through the back into a courtyard that you share with 3 other workshops. A fuller who treads cloth in vats of urine to clean and finish it, a dye shop where cloth gets boiled in great cauldrons of mineral solutions and plant extracts, and a small bronze casting operation that nobody in the building likes but everyone tolerates, because the man who runs it pays his rent on time. You go down the stairs. The stairwell smells like wood and old cooking and the specific sharpness of the fuller's vats from the courtyard. That smell, the urine smell, is one you've stopped noticing mostly. It's just there, part of the background of the building's life, the same way the pigeons are part of the morning and the bells of the Temple of Diana on the hill above are part of the afternoon. You accommodate it, you adapt. The human nose is excellent at deciding that something it smells constantly is no longer worth registering. The workshop is dim, the shutters still mostly closed, the looms standing in the grey light like patient animals waiting. There are 4 of them, large upright looms with the weights hanging from the warp threads, and at busy times there are 3 women working them besides yourself. Your mother and 2 sleeves who belong to your father's business arrangement, a Gallic woman named Sabina, who is maybe 30, and has been with the family since before you were born, and a young Greek girl called Myrto, who is possibly 15, and has been here for 8 months, and is still learning the particular tensions your father's wool requires. Today, it is just you, first. Sabina and Myrto sleep in the courtyard storage room during warm months and in a space under the staircase during cold months, which is warmer but smaller. They are both still there when you come down, which means you have the workshop to yourself for a few minutes before the day properly begins. You take those minutes. You go to the courtyard, where the water channel runs along the base of the wall from the public water source up the hill, a small branch of the city's supply that comes with the building, and is one of the things your father considers worth paying extra for. The water is cold and constant, and you stand in front of it and let the sound of it organize your thoughts. The back pain has settled into its familiar rhythm. Not worse, not better. Just there, a companion for the next 3 or 4 days, reminding you of its presence every time you shift your weight or lean, or carry anything heavier than a cup. You check the arrangement under your tunic. Fine. Secure. The wool strip will hold for a few hours before it needs changing, and you know the schedule of this morning already. 2 hours at the loom before the deliveries arrive, then up to the market with the dye order for the client on the Kalian, then back before midday when your father will need the workshop organised for the afternoon sorting. The cramps are manageable. Today. The first day is always manageable if you just don't stop moving, if you keep enough warmth in your belly and don't stand still too long in one place. Moving is better. Standing still is worse. Sitting at the loom is somewhere in between, which is most of what your days involve. You go inside and you start. The warp threads on the central loom are a fine wool in undyed natural brown, the colour of the fleece it came from, and you're about 3/4 through a length of cloth that's going to a customer on the Via Sacra who wants it for table covers. Not exciting. Not the purple silk that the rich women on the Palatine drape themselves in, brown wool table covers for a merchant who thinks his guests will be impressed by the quality of his linen. But this is the work. This is the bread and the rent and the oil for the lamp. You seat yourself on the low stool before the loom and you begin. The shuttle moves through the warp threads, back and forth. The rhythm of it is something your hands know so well that your mind can be somewhere else entirely while your body does the work. You've been weaving since you were old enough to be trusted not to tangle the threads, which was around 6 or 7, and the motion is as automatic now as walking. But today, with the cramp sitting at the base of your spine like a stone, you find yourself very aware of your body in a way that weaving usually doesn't produce. The slight forward lean that the loom requires, the way you have to shift your weight on the stool every few minutes to keep from sitting in exactly the same position. The small adjustments, constant, that add up over hours into something your body will register tomorrow as soreness. The shuttle moves. Sabina appears from the staircase with Myrto behind her, both of them moving with the quiet efficiency of people who are careful in other people's spaces. Sabina glances at you, not at your face, just at you, the general shape of you sitting at the loom. And then she goes to her own loom without speaking. She's been doing this long enough to read the shape of a morning. She knows. Myrto puts water to heat at the small brazier in the corner of the workshop. This is what help looks like here. Not conversation, not acknowledgement, just water on the heat and space given and the work continuing. And here is where I want to tell you something that you already half know, but that is worth saying plainly, because it explains so much about how this particular chapter of ancient history went. In Rome in the 1st century CE, menstruation is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Every woman experiences it. Roughly 1/3 to half of the female population at any given time is in some phase of their cycle. In a city of 1 million people, that means hundreds of thousands of women are managing this on any given day. And yet, there are no shops that sell menstrual supplies. There is no product, no industry, no economic niche that addresses this need. There are no instructions in medical texts about what materials to use or how to care for yourself during menstruation, beyond the very basic prescription to rest, which is advice so economically impossible for most women that it barely counts as advice at all. There is no social infrastructure of any kind that accommodates or acknowledges this aspect of female life. What there is instead is a vast body of superstition, almost entirely produced by men, about what menstruation does to the world around it. And some of this superstition is so deeply strange that I want to spend a moment with it, because it explains a lot about the invisible logistics of your daily life. Pliny the Elder, Gaius Plinius Secundus, the Roman author who wrote the 37-volume Natural History, a man of such relentless intellectual curiosity that he literally died getting a closer look at a volcanic eruption because he wanted to observe it properly. Pliny has views about menstrual blood, extensive views that he presents with the same confident authority he brings to his descriptions of elephants and foreign geography. According to Pliny, contact with menstrual blood will cause wine to turn sour, it will kill beehives, it will rust iron and bronze, it will cause linen touched by it to turn black, it will cause dogs to go mad if they taste it, it will kill plants it touches, it will dull the edge of iron weapons, it will cause fruit to fall from trees, and the woman herself, in her menstrual state, can do all of this without even touching anything. Just her presence near the beehives, just her gaze toward the wine. He writes, Contact with it turns new wine sour, crops touched by it become barren, grafts die, seeds in gardens are dried up, the fruit of trees falls off, the edge on steel and the gleam of ivory are dulled, hives of bees die, even bronze and iron are at once seized by rust, and a horrible smell fills the air. To taste it drives dogs mad, and infects their bites with an incurable poison. Pliny believes this. He is writing this in the 1st century CE, in the most scientifically sophisticated civilization the ancient world has ever produced, and he believes that a menstruating woman can corrode bronze by proximity. He also, in what appears to be a massive contradiction, states that a naked menstruating woman walking around the edges of a field will protect the crops from insects and blight. Apparently the power works both ways, depending on what you need. These ideas are not fringe beliefs. They are mainstream. They are repeated by other authors. Columella, who writes the definitive Roman agricultural manual, includes instructions about keeping menstruating women away from crops. The medical writers engage with them seriously. They are the background radiation of the world you move through, which means that the invisible logistics of your day include not just managing the physical reality of menstruation, but also managing the social reality of what happens if anyone suspects or knows that you are menstruating. Not because anyone is cruel, not because your family is unsympathetic, but because the world has organized itself around a set of beliefs about your body that make you, on these days, a kind of danger. You cannot enter the Temple of Diana today. This is the specific prohibition you are most aware of this morning, because the Temple of Diana is on your hill, close enough that you can hear the priests moving in the precinct at dawn, and you had planned to go there this week to make an offering for your mother's cough, which has been lingering for 3 weeks and which your mother dismisses but which you worry about with the specific focused worry of the eldest child. The offering will have to wait. Most sanctuaries in the ancient world, Greek and Roman both, though the rules vary by deity and location, require ritual purity of those who enter. Ritual purity means, among other things, not being in contact with blood. Menstrual blood counts. You are therefore in a state of ritual impurity today, and for the next few days, and entering a sanctuary in that state is not just frowned upon, but actively forbidden by religious law. The Latin word for this is supplicum, from which we get the word supplication, though in this context it carries more of the weight of punishment, of consequence, of the thing that happens if you transgress. You're not going to the temple today. You accept this the way you accept most of the constraints of your life. Not with resignation exactly, but with the particular practical orientation of someone who has learned that resistance costs energy, and energy is limited and better spent elsewhere. You note it. You adjust. You continue. The shuttle moves through the warp. Back and forth. The morning light is coming in properly now through the open shutters, and the workshop has the specific warmth that wool-working spaces generate. The animals smell of the fleece, the body heat of people who've been moving and working, the slight warmth of the brazier in the corner. It's not comfortable. Your back still aches. But it's familiar, and familiarity is its own kind of comfort. Myrto brings you the heated water. Not tea this time. Just plain water with a warmed clay pot wrapped in a cloth that you hold against your lower belly. This works, somewhat. The warmth eases the tightness. Not completely, but enough. It is the same solution that women have used since there were women who got cramps. Heat applied to the source of the pain. The medical literature of the ancient world does know that heat helps. Soranus of Ephesus, a Greek physician who practiced in Rome in the early 2nd century CE, and who wrote the most comprehensive gynecological text that survives from the ancient world, recommends warm baths and warm compresses for menstrual pain. He is, compared to Pliny, practically a modern. He actually seems to have talked to women about their experiences, which is rare enough to be remarkable, and his text, The Gynecology, reads at times like someone genuinely trying to be helpful rather than someone constructing a theoretical framework that happens to involve women's bodies. Soranus believes that menstruation, while natural, should proceed easily and without excessive pain. Excessive pain is a symptom of something wrong. He recommends warm oil applied to the lower abdomen, warm baths if available, gentle movement, avoiding cold, eating lightly, drinking warm water or herbal decoctions. He does not recommend complete rest, which marks him as someone who understands that complete rest is not an option most women have. He is an exception. The shuttle moves. By the time your father comes back from the fleece market with 2 sacks of raw wool over his shoulder, and the look he has when he's gotten a reasonable deal, but not as good a deal as he'd hoped, the workshop is fully running, and you're most of the way through the brown wool length, and Sabina is halfway through a lighter natural wool, and Myrto is doing the carding that will feed the next project through a wicker comb that she holds between her knees, pulling the fibres through with a motion that looks easy and isn't. Your father sets the sacks down, runs his fingers through the fleece to assess what he's brought home, and begins talking to Sabina about the morning's purchase with the quick, low-voiced shorthand of people who've done a task together many times. He doesn't address you directly, which isn't unusual. In the hierarchy of the workshop, Sabina runs the floor and you are still being oriented toward full responsibility, even though you've been weaving since childhood. But also this morning there's a quality to your father's not addressing you that you recognize as consideration. He knows. He's not going to make demands of you about the Kalian delivery that would require you to explain why you'd prefer to send Sabina today. He's sending Sabina. He announces this as a practical matter, a question of capacity. He needs the brown cloth finished today because the client is coming this afternoon, so Valeria should stay at the loom. Sabina will handle the Kalian order. This is the invisible courtesy of a household that has figured out how to accommodate something it never discusses. Your father has watched your mother navigate this for 20+ years. He knows the schedule in the same way he knows the fleece market runs early. He has adjusted his logistics. Sabina gathers the dye order and goes, "You keep weaving." There is a specific texture to the work today. The wool under your hands feels slightly rough in a way that makes your fingers aware of every fibre. Not the good rough of a quality fleece with enough lanolin to feel alive, but the slightly scraped sensation of skin that is little too sensitive for ordinary reasons. The body on these days turns up all its volume. You notice more. You feel more. Everything is slightly louder. The cramp shifts when you shift, moves when you move. Not following you exactly, more like a large piece of furniture that you're carrying through a narrow corridor, and it catches on different things at different angles, but is always there. By mid-morning, when the workshop has settled into its rhythm and the noise of the city outside has risen to its full daytime pitch, the voices from the street, the creak of carts, the distant hammering from the bronze-caster's courtyard, the splash of the fuller's vats, you become aware that you need to change the wool strip. This is the specific calculation you've been half-tracking in the back of your mind since you sat down. How long? When? The first day is the heaviest, always, and you're a few hours in. You tell your mother, in the specific compact language that families develop for things they don't want to say plainly in front of people who aren't family, that you're going to the latrina. She nods without looking up from what she's doing. Myrto keeps carding. The workshop continues. The latrina is on the ground floor, a small room off the courtyard, a wooden seat over a channel of water that runs through from the building's water supply. It's not private. There are 2 seats, side by side, because privacy in Roman sanitation is also not something the city's infrastructure has prioritised. But it's unoccupied this morning, and you close the door behind you with the latch. You do what you need to do. New wool strip, folded correctly, positioned. The used one wrapped and tucked into the small cloth bag you carry specifically for this purpose, which will be washed this evening in the bucket in the courtyard. This is the cycle. Manage, change, wash. Every few hours, every day, for several days, every month. The whole process takes maybe 4 minutes, efficient from practice. You're back at the loom before anyone has noticed you are gone. Now, I want to take a moment away from Valeria's morning and step back into the broader picture, because there are some things about the ancient world's management of menstruation that are genuinely interesting beyond the immediate logistics, and one of them is the question of what women actually used. And the honest answer is, we mostly don't know. This is one of the stranger gaps in the historical record. We have extensive documentation of Roman daily life. We have records of what people ate, what they wore, what their houses looked like, what they bought at the market, what jokes they told at dinner parties. We have graffiti from Pompeii telling us about specific people's love lives and political opinions and opinions about each other's hygiene. We have medical texts, legal texts, agricultural texts, philosophical texts, letters, poetry, and a remarkable quantity of graffiti. But the practical specifics of menstrual management are almost completely absent from the written record. And the reason, as far as historians can determine, is a combination of 2 factors. 1, these details were considered beneath the level of discourse that men, the people writing, engaged in. 2, these were things women knew. They passed this information between themselves, mother to daughter, woman to woman, in the unrecorded verbal transmission of domestic knowledge that makes up so much of how people actually lived, and that is almost entirely lost to us because nobody wrote it down. What we can piece together comes from fragments. There are references in medical texts to penoi, which Soranus uses as a technical term for something like a vaginal tampon, a soft material used internally. He's discussing it in the context of medical treatment, but the implication is clear. This was something women were familiar with and practiced. The Roman poet Juvenal, in his 6th satire, a long and deeply unpleasant rant about the failings of women that is nevertheless a useful source of incidental detail about Roman life, makes a passing reference to blood-soaked wool. This is exactly what you're using. Archaeological finds from Roman Britain include what appear to be artifacts that historians have interpreted as menstrual pads made of organic material, though organic material doesn't preserve well, so the evidence is fragmentary and debated. Soft wool is the most commonly cited material, and it makes sense. Wool is absorbent. It's everywhere in the ancient world, particularly in a city whose economy is substantially built on textile production. It can be washed and reused indefinitely. It's soft enough to be comfortable, and it has natural antibacterial properties from the lanolin. Sea sponges, actual Mediterranean sponges, were used in ancient Greece, and the evidence for this is somewhat stronger. There are references in Greek sources to Gynekaia spongia, women's sponges, and the sponge harvesting industry of the Aegean was large enough that the scale of demand is suggestive. A sponge could be tied with a cord, used, removed, washed, and reused. It was a technology available to those who could afford it and who had access to the Mediterranean fishing economy, which in coastal cities was much of the population. Some historians have proposed that linen strips were also common, particularly in Egypt where linen was the predominant textile. And for women who had neither wool nor sponges, there was probably improvised management with whatever fabric was available, which is a trajectory that will continue for the next 2,000 years, by the way, until disposable menstrual products become available in the 20th century. The point is, women managed. They always managed. They managed with whatever they had, with the knowledge passed between them, with the adaptations developed across generations of women figuring out the same problem. What they didn't have was the social support structure that would have made the management easier. You don't have sick leave. You don't have the option of staying home unless you're incapacitated, and the Roman bar for female incapacitation is set extremely high. Your body's pain is not, in the framework of your world, a reason to stop working. Pain is for severe illness, for visible injury, for the kind of physical distress that other people can see. The pain that lives inside the body, in the muscles and the cramping viscera, that's invisible pain. And invisible pain is the kind you carry quietly. Your mother has been carrying it for 20 years, and you are learning from her. You find your rhythm at the loom. The morning moves. Around the 3rd hour after dawn, Rome runs on a system of 12 hours of daylight, meaning the hours are longer in summer and shorter in winter. So the 3rd hour in late winter is roughly mid-morning. There's a break for the first proper meal of the day. Your mother brings bread and olive oil and a few dried figs that need using before they go fully hard, and you eat at the small table in the corner of the workshop, while Myrto takes her food to the courtyard, and your father eats standing up and tells Sabina, who's returned from the Calian delivery, that the client there is going to want the green-dyed wool in 2 weeks, and the preparation needs to start now. You eat carefully. On bad days, the cramping is worse when you eat and your stomach doesn't want food, but today is not a bad day. Today the bread goes down fine and the olive oil is slightly peppery in the way of good southern Italian olive oil, and the dried figs are sticky and sweet, and your body accepts all of it with something like relief. You're 17 and physically healthy and your constitution is good, which is the kind of thing that only means something when it might not be. You know women who have debilitating cramps, women for whom the first 2 days of every month mean hours, spent curled on their sleeping mats, unable to work. Your mother has a neighbour 2 buildings over, a fuller's wife, who is sometimes seen unable to stand up during her worst days. Her husband covers for her to their clients, with vague references to female ailments, and the clients accept this with the slightly awkward silence that men of this period deploy whenever female biology is mentioned in a business context. You're lucky in your body. You finish the bread and get back to the loom. By midday, when the sun is at its highest and the workshop shutters are opened fully to catch whatever air is moving through the city, you're nearly done with the brown wool length. The rhythm of the work has taken over completely. That state of sustained physical repetition that is not quite thinking and not quite not thinking, where the body knows what to do and the mind roams at a kind of half attention across the things it's been carrying. You're thinking about the temple offering, not the Temple of Diana, which you can't enter right now. But there are other options. The Temple of Juno is on the Calian Hill, and Juno's domain includes women's health, and specifically reproductive health, which makes her a reasonable deity to approach about your mother's cough, even though a cough isn't strictly a reproductive issue. Juno is the patron of women in the broadest sense. She receives whatever women bring her. But the question of ritual purity still applies to Juno's temple as much as Diana's, and you'll still be impure tomorrow, and probably the day after. The third or fourth day is usually lighter. By the fourth or fifth day, you're usually clear. You'll go on the fifth day if your mother's cough holds. You tell yourself this the way you schedule everything in these first days. Around the biology, working the constraints. Now. Here is something I want to tell you about ancient Greece, because we've been in Rome for the whole morning, and the Greek perspective on this is both similar and interestingly different, and also because Greek sources are actually somewhat more forthcoming about the details than Roman ones, which is one of those historical asymmetries that rewards attention. In ancient Athens, particularly classical Athens, the Athens of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Athens of Socrates and Plato and the Parthenon, and the democracy that we still point to as a founding reference, menstruation occupied a complicated position in the social order. And understanding that position requires understanding something about how Athenian society was organized, which is, women basically didn't exist in public life. This is not a metaphor. This is structural. Respectable Athenian women, citizen women, women from families with status, lived almost entirely in the gynaeconitis, the women's quarters of the household. They left the house for specific occasions, religious festivals, funerals, some market activities if they were of the lower classes who couldn't afford the luxury of purdah. The elaborate seclusion of upper-class Athenian women is one of the more striking social arrangements of the ancient world, and it has implications for how menstruation was navigated. On one hand, if you're already confined to the household most of the time, the practical logistics of menstruation are somewhat easier. You're not navigating public space with this to manage. You're in your own space, surrounded by family and household slaves who know your situation. On the other hand, the ideological weight of menstrual impurity in ancient Greece is, if anything, more elaborate than in Rome. The Greek word for the menstrual cycle is katamenia, the monthly things. The word for the blood itself is gynehaima, woman's blood, but also sometimes referred to by a specific term that emphasizes its periodic cyclical nature. And the medical and philosophical literature surrounding it is extensive and mostly terrible. Aristotle is particularly useful here, in the sense that he is wrong in fascinating ways that reveal a lot about how Greek intellectual culture understood female biology. Aristotle's theory of reproduction, which is extraordinarily influential and will remain so for many centuries, holds that the male provides the active organizing principle, the form in reproduction, while the female provides the matter. Specifically, the female provides menstrual blood, which is the material from which the fetus is made. The male semen acts upon this material and organizes it into a human being. Without menstrual blood, no fetus. Without semen, just disorganized matter. This is why, in Aristotle's view, females are inherently less complete than males. They cannot produce the animating, organizing principle. They are, in a philosophical sense, incomplete males, beings whose development was arrested before they could reach their full potential. This is not a minor opinion. This is the foundational biology of one of the most important thinkers in Western intellectual history. He writes about menstrual blood extensively in his biological works, and what's interesting is that he's clearly working from observation. He knows that menstrual cycles are connected to reproduction. He knows the rough timing. He knows that pregnancy stops menstruation. but his explanatory framework is so distorted by his theoretical commitments that the observations don't lead him to anything useful. He also believes, as Pliny does, that menstrual blood has dangerous properties. He notes that it can tarnish mirrors. He attributes this to the soul principle in the blood. There is something active in it, something female vital force that lingers in the air and condenses on reflective surfaces and leaves a mark. This is the kind of thing that sounds like pure fantasy until you realize that for a woman living in classical Athens, the practical consequence was that you were considered polluting. Your body in its natural state was a source of miasma, the Greek term for ritual pollution, a contaminating influence that spread outward from its source to affect the ritual purity of everything and everyone around it. You couldn't enter most sanctuaries. You couldn't participate in certain rituals. Some sources suggest you couldn't prepare food for your household. And the women who had more domestic freedom, lower class women, slave women, women who moved through public space out of economic necessity, were navigating all of this while also navigating the fact that their menstrual state was, potentially, visible to others in ways they couldn't fully control. Because here is the other thing about the ancient world that we moderns don't always immediately account for. Colour fastness of dyes was not what it is today. Clothing was lighter coloured in general, and light-coloured wool or linen in ancient Greece and Rome did not hide bloodstains the way darker or thicker modern fabrics might. This was a constant ambient risk. The management system had to actually work, not just theoretically. A failure of the wool strip or the sponge in a public space was a social catastrophe in a world where the failure would be visible, and where the visible evidence of menstruation carried all that ideological weight. This is why the sea sponge technology matters. A sponge used internally, properly secured, didn't rely on external absorbency. It contained rather than absorbed. In a world without dark-coloured fabrics and without the option of just changing your clothes at a moment's notice because you only own 3 garments anyway, internal management was arguably more reliable. Greek women who lived near the coasts, which was most women, given the geography of the Greek world, had access to sponges from the Aegean fishing industry. This is one of the places where geographic luck becomes bodily luck. Women in inland communities had fewer options. Women in cities like Athens, which was close enough to the coast that sponges were available at market, had more. Back to Rome, back to the Aventine. The afternoon has its own texture. The client for the brown wool arrives earlier than expected. A merchant named Quintus who buys table linens and wall hangings and distributes them to shops in the wealthier neighbourhoods. He's a compact man with short grey hair and the particular dry courtesy of someone who's been transacting business his entire life and has no interest in small talk but plenty of interest in the quality of what he's being offered. Your father handles him. The cloth comes off the loom and is measured and inspected and folded, and a price is agreed upon, and Quintus leaves. It's the middle afternoon, and the workshop is in the particular post-transaction calm that follows a successful sale. Your father is pleased. You can tell because he stops frowning. He tells you, while he's rolling up the measuring cord, that you did good work this week. He doesn't say it the way a poet would say it. He says it the way a man who counts things says it. This output is satisfactory, and the satisfactory output reflects well on the labour inputs. But still, you feel something loosen in your chest when he says it. He looks at you briefly, really looks at you the way parents sometimes do, taking in the state of you, and then he says, practically, that the afternoon is light, and if you want to go to the baths before the evening, he can spare you. The baths. This is, today, complicated. The thermae, The great public baths of Rome are one of the genuine marvels of the ancient city. Your neighbourhood has access to a mid-sized bath complex a few streets over that isn't one of the enormous imperial complexes. Those are on the Campus Martius or the Esquiline, on the other side of the city, requiring a journey. But it's well maintained, warm, and has separate hours for women. The women's hour in most public baths runs in the early afternoon, before the men take over for the evening, or in some complexes there are entirely separate facilities. The baths are important, not just for cleanliness, though they are important for that in a city where almost nobody has running water in their private dwelling, and personal hygiene is a significant logistical challenge. The baths are social spaces, news-exchanging spaces, the place where women who are mostly household-bound manage to have conversations with people outside their immediate domestic circle. They are, in a real sense, one of the few semi-public spaces where women's social lives can happen. You go to the baths when you're bleeding. Not everyone does. There are women who take the impurity prohibition more seriously, and who stay away from any shared water space during their period, extending the logic of ritual pollution into the domain of physical shared space. Your mother does this, actually. She doesn't go to the baths for the first 2 days, a personal practice that she'd maintained her whole life. But you go. You go because the warm water helps the cramps, because the baths are one of the few places where you can be genuinely warm and clean in a way that the apartment doesn't permit, and because you've developed the specific pragmatic approach of a person who is not going to sacrifice physical comfort for theoretical purity concerns. Also, because the warm bath helps, it really helps. You tell your father yes. You wrap yourself in your heavy wool shawl. The day has the cold edge of late winter, the kind of cold that comes off the Tiber when the wind is from the north. And you walk to the baths. The streets of the Aventine are the streets you know, narrow, slightly uneven underfoot where the stones have shifted, lined with the tall facades of apartment buildings that block the sun for most of the day. The smell is complex and layered in a way that you stopped consciously registering years ago. Cooking, mostly. The thermopolia have their shuttered fronts open, the clay pots set into the counter with the hot food available for purchase, grain porridge, lentils, sometimes salted fish, sometimes meat on days when someone can afford it. The smells that come off these are good. The steamy, warm smells of mass-cooked food, and they mix with the smell of animal, mules and donkeys are still allowed in the city in daytime, horses less so, and the smell of humanity in general. You navigate the street without thinking about it, your body knowing the route. The bath complex has a modest entrance, a low doorway, a small vestibule where you leave your sandals with the attendant and hand over your wooden token for the women's section, a coin's worth stamped into the wood by the bath manager. It costs a quadrans for women, which is the smallest coin denomination, the kind you keep in the small pouch you carry tucked inside your belt. Inside, the change from outside air to bath air is immediate and overwhelming in the best way. Warm. Not just warm, the specific damp warmth of a hypocaust-heated building, the underfloor heating system that Rome perfected, and that will be one of the things the empire's collapse takes with it for centuries. The floor is warm under your bare feet. You've left your sandals at the entrance, and the air has the moisture of many bodies' worth of warm water evaporating in an enclosed space. It smells like steam, stone, olive oil from the strigils, the curved metal scrapers that people use to clean their skin. Soap exists in the ancient world, but isn't widely used in the baths. The Roman method is to oil the skin and scrape it, removing dirt, oil and dead skin cells with the metal blade. The particular clean smell of water that hasn't been sitting in an open vessel in the heat, but instead has been moving, heated, refreshed. Under all of that, humans. There are maybe 20 women in the women's section this afternoon, which is a moderate crowd. You know 3 of them by sight. A neighbour from 2 floors up in the building adjacent to yours, the wife of the fuller from your courtyard, and a woman you know only as the one who sells bread from the bakery on the corner, whose actual name you've never learned in 3 years of buying bread from her. You find a space on the stone bench along the wall of the changing room. You take off your tunic. You fold it. You put it on the peg above the bench. And then you manage, in the specific practiced way of doing something that requires attention, but that you've done enough times that the attention is nearly automatic, the change from this morning's arrangement to the absence of it, because the baths require the absence of it. You roll the used wool strip tightly and put it in the cloth bag. The bag goes in the fold of your tunic on the peg. You're now a woman in a Roman bath with a specific practical concern of the next hour. You're bleeding. You're in shared water, and you need to manage this without making it visible. Some historians suggest that Roman women did not go to the baths during their heaviest days precisely because of this problem. This is probably true for some women. But the ancient world also doesn't have the squeamishness about bodies and bodily functions that will develop in later centuries in European culture. Roman bathrooms and bath facilities are communal in ways that feel fairly shocking to modern sensibilities, and the available evidence suggests that women did bathe during their periods, with the practical approach to bodily function that the ancient world generally employed. You move from the changing room into the tepidarium, the warm room, where the temperature is maintained at a comfortable level, and people soak and talk and occasionally have their hair attended to by slaves who circulate through the bath complex offering services. The water in the pool here is chest deep and clear, and the temperature is exactly what your back has been asking for all day. You lower yourself in. The warmth comes up around you like something material, like a hand pressing against your lower back, and then the heat spreading outward through the muscle and the spasm and the grinding tension of the whole anterior chain that's been knotted since you woke up. You close your eyes. One specific minute in your day that is better than everything around it. The cramp eases, not gone, but pushed back. The warmth is doing what the chamomile tea and the hot water bottle and all the small adjustments of the morning have been working toward, getting the muscles to release, even partially, even temporarily. You open your eyes. The fuller's wife is across the pool, talking to the woman you don't know. The neighbour from upstairs is being rubbed down by a slave she's brought with her, a young Nubian girl who works with practiced efficiency at the woman's shoulders. The bread seller is floating on her back with her eyes closed, her arms spread, achieving something that looks like actual peace. The bath complex is the great equalizer of Roman social life to a point. Women from different social levels share the water. Freed women and slave women and the wives of equestrians, the truly wealthy have their own baths in their houses and don't come here, all occupy the same warm pool. The social distinctions reassert themselves in the change room, in who has a slave to attend them and who doesn't, in the quality of the oil flask and the fineness of the bath sheet. But in the water, there's a temporary suspension. You float, or as close to floating as your body permits, with your feet still touching the bottom and the water at your shoulders, your arms out to the sides, your head tipped back slightly so the water comes up around your ears, and the sound of the bath changes, becomes muffled. The women's conversations reduced to the distant, blurred sound of speech without words. This specific thing, water and warmth and the muffling of everything. If there is one thing about the ancient world that the modern world has replicated in an improved form, it's this. The simple human understanding that a warm bath at the end of a hard day is one of the fundamental goods available to a body. The Romans built entire cities around this principle. They were right. You stay in the water for a long time. Eventually, probably an hour, possibly longer. The time in the baths always slips a little. You move to the caldarium, the hot room, where the temperature rises to something close to sauna level, and you sit on the stone bench and let the heat work on you from all sides. Not water now, but air, and the sweat comes up on your skin, and the last knotted places in your back finally give up their resistance. Then cold, the frigidarium. The cold plunge is the final stage, and you do it quickly, the way everyone does it. A fast, full immersion in the cold pool, followed by the immediate sense of skin pulled tightly over the body, every nerve awake, blood moving fast to the extremities. The paradox of the cold plunge that leaves you warmer than before. Out, dried with the rough bath cloth you brought, oiled from the small flask you also brought, running the strigil down your arms and legs to remove the dead skin and the day's accumulation of textile dust and workshop smoke. Back to the changing room, back to the process you are already expert at. The fuller's wife catches your eye while you're dressing. She's a woman of maybe 35, sturdy, with the kind of face that has been outdoors in all weather. She and you have a limited acquaintance built on proximity rather than affinity, the neighbourly knowledge of each other's routines. She looks at your face and she looks away, and then she looks back and she says, quietly, so no one else catches it, "My sister swears by Poppy." You don't understand for a moment. She adds, still quietly, "For the pain, a small amount in wine. She says it helps." And there it is, that specific thing. The transmission of practical knowledge that never gets written down. Mother to daughter, neighbour to neighbour. The undocumented medical literature of women's bodies, passed in bath complexes and kitchens and the back rooms of workshops, in voices low enough not to be overheard. Poppy as analgesia. Opium. The ancient world knows perfectly well that poppy preparations dull pain. It's used medicinally, including in some obstetric contexts, and women apparently share this knowledge among themselves for this specific application. Serenus doesn't mention it for menstrual pain. The male medical texts largely don't, but the fuller's wife knows about it from her sister, who presumably knows about it from somewhere. "Thank you," you say. She shrugs. "We all have to manage." She gathers her bath things and goes. You stand there for a moment in the changing room, half-dressed, thinking about that. We all have to manage. 4 words that contain the entire female medical history of the ancient world. The practical wisdom, the acknowledged reality, the complete absence of institutional support and the complete presence of individual adaptation. We all have to manage. You finish dressing and go back out into the afternoon. The street is cold after the baths. The transition hits hard, as it always does, the city air against skin that's been warm for an hour. You pull the wool shawl tight around you and walk quickly. The sun is lower now. The shadows between the apartment buildings stretch across the whole width of the street in these late winter afternoons, and the city enters its own kind of transition hour, The shift from day business to evening business, from the morning commerce and the afternoon baths to the evening meals and the lamps lit in windows and the taverns beginning to fill. You don't go to taverns. Women of your social position in Rome do not frequent taverns unaccompanied. This is one of the many categorical prohibitions that structure your movement through the city. Taverns are the province of men and of women in specific professions. You know this boundary the way you know the street layout, as fact, as navigation. But you can see into them as you pass through the open doorways, the men hunched over cups, the smell of sour wine and bodies, the particular noise of unstructured evening. You keep walking. There's a moment on the way back when you pass the Temple of Diana. The precinct is visible from the street, the column bases and the stairs and the triangular pediment that catches the last of the afternoon light. There are people going in, a woman with a child, two older women moving slowly, a man who stands at the base of the steps and looks up for a long time before ascending. You stop. You stand outside the precinct boundary and you look at the temple. You believe in Diana. This is not a complicated or philosophical belief, not the elaborate theological reasoning of the educated men who write about religion. It's a practical belief, rooted in the same pragmatism that structures everything else. You have made offerings to Diana before and things have subsequently gone well. The correlation feels meaningful. The connection feels real. She is the goddess of the moon, of childbirth, of women, of hunting. She is also, specifically, the goddess associated with the moon's cycle, which is the cycle of the month, which is the cycle of your body. This is the particular cruelty of the ritual impurity rule. The goddess most specifically associated with the female body and the monthly cycle is precisely the one whose temple you cannot enter when you are experiencing that cycle. The logic here is not, apparently, something that the ancient world found troubling. You find it troubling. You stand at the edge of the precinct and you look at the temple for another moment. Then you speak quietly, under the ambient noise of the street. You speak to her the way you would speak to someone who already knows the situation, who understands the logistics of this, who has spent millennia receiving the specific practical prayers of women who can't come inside. You tell her about your mother's cough. You tell her you'll be back. You walk home. The apartment smells like food when you come in. Your mother is making pulls, the grain porridge that is the cornerstone of the Roman working-class diet, stirred in a clay pot over the brazier with additions of whatever's available. Today some dried herbs and a small amount of the hard cheese from the market crumbled in. It smells warm and slightly savoury and exactly like coming home. Your brothers are loud. Marcus is arguing with your father about something that you don't bother following. And the younger one, Titus, who is 9 and still in the stage of development where loudness is its own reward, is running through the apartment in a way that has already earned him one correction from your mother and is building toward a second. You sit down at the table, the evening of a working family in ancient Rome, narrow and warm and too many people in too little space, and the food is simple. And there isn't quite enough of it, but there's enough, and outside the window the city is doing its evening thing. Your father, with the slight expansiveness that comes over him in the evenings after a good work day, starts talking about Quintus's order and what it means for next month. He talks about the fleece quality and the dye costs and the schedule of deliveries. He talks the way men of his position talk about work, as if the work is the story, and the story is all. Your mother eats and listens. You eat and listen. You're thinking about the fuller's wife's sister and the poppy preparation, and whether it's available at the spice shops near the market. and whether the cost is within what you could reasonably manage. Titus gets his second correction. Marcus stops arguing. The porridge is eaten. The evening moves. After the meal, the small ritual of the household gods, your father makes the offering at the small lararium in the corner of the main room. A simple gesture, a few grains of salt, a small pour of wine. The Lairs receive their share. The household is acknowledged as under their protection. This is daily, automatic, the background religion of the Roman household that requires no priest and no occasion. Just the continuity of daily practice. You wash the clay pots. The water is cold. Your hands in the cold water at the end of the day feel the work of the day accumulated in them. The slight roughness from the wool, the specific tiredness that is in the muscles of the palm and the fingers from the shuttle, moving for hours, not pain, tiredness, the good tiredness of things accomplished. Your back is quieter now. The baths helped, the warm porridge helped, the evening is calmer than the day. You take the small cloth bag from where you've had it all day and deal with its contents quietly at the water basin, washing the wool strips in the cold water with a small amount of the harsh soap your mother keeps for the household washing. You rinse them and wring them out and hang them to dry inside the chest, which you'll leave open slightly overnight for air. Nobody comments on this. This is also just part of the household's life. You come out from the small space of the kitchen corner into the main room, where your father is telling your brothers something about the emperor. Marcus is listening with the somewhat performed attention of a boy who wants to seem interested. Titus has already fallen asleep against the wall. Your mother is sitting by the window. The lamplight is on her face, the specific, soft, uneven light of an oil lamp that moves slightly when there's a breath of air. And in this light you can see that she looks tired. Not the ordinary tired of the end of a work day. The deeper tired, the tired that lives in people who have been doing difficult things for a long time without being able to stop. Her cough. You sit beside her. She doesn't speak. You don't speak. This is one of the particular intimacies of a household where speech is always present and always purposeful. The moments when you just sit in proximity to someone you love and that is enough. After a while, she says quietly, so the men don't hear it. How was it today? She means, how was the first day? Fine, you say. Manageable. She nods. The second day will be harder, I know. The chamomile helps, if you can keep it warm. I know. She looks at the lamp. Your grandmother used to say it got easier with children, she says. She said it was never as bad after Antonia was born. Antonia is your dead aunt, the one who died in the fever 8 years ago. You think about this. Having children to ease the monthly pain is the kind of advice that involves a significant trade-off that your grandmother apparently didn't emphasize. You say, the fuller's wife told me about Poppy. Your mother looks at you sideways. Her sister, you add. Your mother's expression does the particular thing it does when she's evaluating information. A slight tightening around the eyes. A pause. I've heard this, she says finally. It works. You need to be careful with the amount. A little is useful. More than a little is not useful. And then she goes back to looking at the lamp. The conversation is over, but you've received what you needed. The confirmation that this is real knowledge, that it circulates among women who need it, that your mother knows it too, even though she never mentioned it, because there's a whole body of practical knowledge that moves between women in exactly this way. Disclosed only when relevant, only when the recipient is ready, only when the moment presents itself. You think about the layers of it. How many other things does your mother know that you haven't needed yet? What other practical adaptations exist in the unwritten medical tradition of women's bodies that will come to you in installments across your life, disclosed by whoever happens to be standing near you when the need arises? The fuller's wife in the bath, your cousin Tertia 3 years ago. Eventually, if you have daughters, yourself. The knowledge moves. Outside, the city is settling into its night rhythms. The taverns are in full swing, the noise of them a distant texture under the evening air. Somewhere, not too far on the hill above, you can hear the night watchman's rounds, the measured footsteps and the periodic call, the fires of Rome in winter, the braziers in apartments, the oil lamps in windows, the torches at the important intersections where the vigiles maintain their watch. 1.5 million people settling in for the night. Titus is carried to bed by your father, still asleep. Marcus goes to bed without being told, which is unusual enough that you notice it. Your father makes his final check of the workshop, the particular end-of-day inventory that he does every night, the looms, the stock, the locked chest where the tools are kept, the shutters properly secured. His footsteps move through the floor below you in their familiar pattern, the same circuit every night, the sound of a man who has made this space his responsibility and takes it seriously. Your mother goes to bed, you stay at the window a little longer, and here's where I want to do something the written history doesn't do much of, which is to stand back from this specific apartment on this specific hill in this specific evening and look at what we're actually looking at. We're looking at a woman, a girl, really, in the modern understanding. 17 is adolescence, who has spent today doing the following things simultaneously: managing a significant physical experience that causes real pain and real logistical complexity, working a full day at a loom, producing a product that contributes to her family's economic survival, navigating the social geography of a large city, including its rules and prohibitions, and the way those rules apply specifically to her body, going to the baths and managing the emotional mathematics of the social space there, having a brief conversation about traditional medicine that will be useful to her for decades, sitting with her mother at the end of the day and exchanging 12 words of practical information. None of this is recorded anywhere. There is no historical document that follows Valeria through this day. She doesn't exist as a named individual in any ancient source. The sources we have are about men, about emperors and philosophers and generals, and the occasional exceptional woman who managed to enter history through the door of being exceptional rather than the door of being ordinary. But Valeria is not exceptional. Valeria is every Roman woman. She is the hundreds of thousands of ordinary women who wove the cloth and carried the water and made the offerings and managed their bodies and passed knowledge to their daughters and kept the city running in ways that the men who wrote about the city found too obvious to mention. The history of the ancient world that we have is almost entirely the history of the exceptions. The historians were men, the men wrote about men. The things that women did and knew and managed were below the level of discourse, beneath the threshold of importance, obvious enough not to need recording. And so we lose it. We lose the fuller's wife's knowledge about poppy. We lose the specific fold that makes the wool strip most efficient. We lose the conversations that happened in bath complexes between women who are managing the same problem in different ways and sharing solutions. We lose the practical medical tradition that existed in women's communities, parallel to and partially separate from the official medical tradition of Galen and Soranus. built from generations of experiential knowledge rather than theoretical frameworks. What we have instead are the men's theories. Pliny's menstrual blood rusting iron, Aristotle's menstrual blood as mere matter waiting for male organising principle, the impurity rules, the temple prohibitions, the agricultural superstitions, and the women behind all of that managing. You look at the city. The dome of the Capitoline is visible from here, just barely, the highest point catching the last of the evening light before it fades. The city spreads out down the hill and across the valley and up the other hills in all directions, its million lives all happening simultaneously in the dark, the way it's happened for centuries, the way it will keep happening. You think about the women in this city tonight, the ones managing the same thing you're managing, the ones who will, in the days ahead, be having their own quiet conversations in bath complexes and across kitchen tables, passing the same practical knowledge that you receive today from a woman you don't fully know. It's its own kind of civilization, one that runs parallel to the one they built in marble. You go to bed. The sleeping mat is familiar under your body, the wool blanket warm, the pillow, a folded piece of cloth, nothing fancy, correctly angled for your shoulder. The particular organisation of a body getting into its sleeping position with the consciousness of what today has been and the management of what tonight needs to be. Change the wool strip before bed. Yes, this is done. Comfortable enough, safe enough, warm enough. The back pain has retreated to a manageable distance, far enough away that you're not aware of it every second. Close enough that you know it's still there. This is the bargain you make at the end of the first day. You close your eyes. The sounds of the apartment settle around you. Your mother's breathing from the other room, slower now in sleep. The slight movement of the building as the night wind picks up. The Aventine always catches a wind off the Tiber, and the buildings here creak slightly when it comes through. The distant city. You think briefly about the temple offering. The 5th day. Diana will receive it. The thought disperses. Sleep is pulling you down with the specific weight of physical tiredness, the good heaviness of a body that has worked and eaten and bathed, and is now entirely done with the project of consciousness for a few hours. And I want to tell you something here at the edge of sleep about what you've just witnessed. You've just spent a day inside a life that the history books have almost entirely erased. Not dramatically erased, not burned or suppressed, just not recorded, not considered worth the cost of the papyrus and the ink and the copyist's time. The daily lives of ordinary women in the ancient world are a gap in our knowledge so large and so fundamental that we mostly don't even notice the gap. But the gap is full of women like Valeria, managing with wool and cold water and chamomile tea and the knowledge passed between them in bath complexes, full of women making the practical calculations that allowed them to move through cities organised around beliefs about their bodies that were almost entirely wrong, but that nevertheless structured their access to temples and markets and social spaces. Full of the adaptations that humans make when they're given no institutional support for something they have to do anyway. The ancient world built aqueducts. It built roads that lasted for millennia. It built philosophical systems still argued about today. It built legal codes that the modern world borrowed from, and it never once built a solution to the problem that half its population solved every month with wool. The women were practical. They are always practical. The wool strips are hanging inside the chest, drying. Tomorrow is the 2nd day, which your mother says will be harder. The 2nd day arrives without announcement. No church bells here. Rome has no church bells, not yet. That particular sound is several centuries away. But the city has its own morning signals, and you know them all. The first carts, which are allowed in the city only at night, and which must be finished with their deliveries and out of the streets before the third hour, making a final rush in the hour before dawn that sounds like thunder at the edge of your sleep. The bakers who start their fires early enough that the smell of baking bread is in the air before the light is, a smell so particular and so warm that it has its own alarm clock quality. The birds, which Rome has in extraordinary numbers for a city of its size, the sparrows that nest in every crack of every building, the starlings that wheel over the river at dusk and dawn in formations that look like smoke, the crows on the Capitoline, the pigeons everywhere. You wake before the birds. The apartment is still dark and still cold, and the wool blanket has twisted in the night, and your first movement is the specific inventory of a body waking on a second day. Back. Yes, worse than yesterday. Your mother was right. The deep ache that yesterday was distant is today close enough to be the first thing you're aware of before you've even fully opened your eyes. The low belly tight and cramped in a way that yesterday's chamomile tea reduced to background noise but hasn't eliminated. Your mother is already up. You can tell by the sound of the brazier being dealt with in the kitchen, the particular scrape of someone clearing ash and rebuilding a fire. You lie still for another moment, not sleeping, just taking stock. This is the private calculation that happens in the gap between sleeping and rising, the internal conversation between what your body's experiencing and what the day requires. The day requires early start. There's delivery from the fleece supplier coming before the second hour that needs to be received and checked, and your father asked you last night to handle it because he has to go to the fuller's early to discuss the finishing on the cloth that Quintus needs for the next order. So you're needed downstairs. You're needed organised and present and capable of dealing with the delivery, which means capable of carrying and moving and assessing, which means your body needs to cooperate enough to do those things. It will cooperate. It always cooperates enough. The back pain doesn't move when you move. It travels with you, the way a piece of luggage you're carrying moves with you. You've learned that the first 10 minutes upright are the hardest, and then the movement itself creates a kind of warmth that makes the pain more manageable. And if you can get through those 10 minutes, the morning opens up a little. You get up. The cold floor, the dark kitchen, the chamomile cup your mother puts in your hands without a word, without even turning away from the brazier, as if she has eyes in the back of her head, or as if she has simply done this enough times to have timed it perfectly. You drink, bitter and grassy and warm in a way that goes directly to the centre of the cramping and pushes against it, or at least creates enough warmth that your body's distracted toward comfort. Fleece delivery, your mother says. I know. The usual man or his boy? Didn't say. She considers this. The boy measures short. Check everything twice. You nod. This is the workshop knowledge, the accumulated experience of 3 years of receiving deliveries, the small practical intelligence of a family business that has been cheated often enough to know where the cheats live. The fleece supplier's delivery boy has a habit of packing the sacks so that the good fleece is on top, and the shorter, less valuable fibre is in the middle and bottom. And if you don't check all the way through the sack, you pay for quality and receive average. Your father spotted this 2 months ago. Now you all know. You go downstairs before the light is properly up. The workshop in the pre-dawn hour has its own atmosphere, the looms standing in the grey like monuments, the smell of wool and wood and the slight cold that the building holds in its stones overnight and doesn't release until the sun has been up for a couple of hours. Your breath makes small clouds in the air when you breathe out. You light the lamp and sit on the low stool near the workshop door and wait. The cramp makes itself known every time you shift your weight. Not severe enough to stop you, severe enough to be a continuous presence, a companion you haven't invited and cannot dismiss. You think about what you know about pain. You know a fair amount for 17, in the way that people who live in the ancient world generally know more about pain than people in the modern world, not because they're more stoic or tougher in any fundamental way, but because they encounter it more often and in more direct forms, and because the distance between pain and death is shorter. Your uncle died of a fever, your aunt died of something that started as a cough, and deepened and didn't stop. A girl in your building last year died in childbirth at 19, and her baby with her. Your father has a scar on his forearm from a hook that slipped when he was 16, and which got infected badly enough that there was a week when his family thought they'd lose the arm. Pain in this world is a constant negotiation. Not a crisis every time, not an emergency, just a factor. You manage it the way you manage weather, by being prepared, by knowing what helps and what doesn't, by not expecting it to be otherwise. The cramps are what they are. You know what helps. You deploy the helps. You continue. The delivery comes just after the second hour. Not the supplier's boy, but a man you don't know, which makes you immediately alert. He's a large person, middle-aged, with the kind of hands that do physical work and the kind of face that doesn't bother with expressions. He has 3 sacks and a handcart and the manner of someone who wants to put the goods down and leave. Wait, you say, when he begins to unload. He looks at you with the particular expression of a man who's been told to wait by a teenage girl and has opinions about this. You look back at him with the expression of someone who's going to check every sack regardless of his opinions. You check every sack. All the way through, plunging your arm into the wool up to the elbow, feeling through the layers, pulling out handfuls from the middle and the bottom and bringing them into the lamplight to assess. The quality is consistent. Good, actually. There are no tricks in these sacks. The fibre is what was ordered throughout. Either this man is more honest than the supplier's boy, or he didn't have time to pack them dishonestly. You accept the delivery. He goes. You sit back on the stool and your back speaks to you about the activity of leaning into 3 heavy sacks, and you let it speak and you do not argue with it. Sabina arrives, then Myrto, then your mother, then eventually your father, who comes back from the Fullers with the complicated look of someone who has received information that is partly good and partly complicated and is still organizing it in his mind. The workshop day begins. Now I want to take you out of the Aventine for a while and take you somewhere else, because there is a person in this city who is going to be important to today's story, and I need to tell you about him so that when you encounter him, or rather, encounter what he represents, you understand what you're walking into. His name is not important. He is a medicus, a physician, which in Rome means a person of Greek origin, or Greek training, or Greek education, or sometimes just Greek affiliation, because the entire medical profession in the Roman world is essentially a Greek import. The Romans themselves were deeply suspicious of doctors for most of their history. Cato the Elder, the famous conservative Roman of the 2nd century BCE, warned his son against Greek physicians explicitly, on the grounds that the Greeks were trying to corrupt Roman values and that Greek doctors specifically would kill their patients with their foreign theories. Pliny echoes this suspicion 200 years later. And yet, Romans used doctors. Roman medicine, despite its theoretical framework being wrong in so many fundamental ways, produced some genuinely effective treatments, not because the theories were right, but because the observation was good, because physicians watched what actually happened to patients and sometimes correctly identified things that worked, even if they completely misunderstood why. The famous discovery of willow bark as a fever reducer, the original source of aspirin, happened because someone observed that it worked, not because anyone understood salicylic acid. A lot of ancient medicine works this way. Effective treatments accidentally derived from wrong theories or correct observations wrapped in incorrect explanations. The medicus who matters to today is a physician who practices from a small room on the ground floor of a building near the Forum Boarium, the old cattle market that sits between the Tiber and the Forum Romanum, maybe 15 minutes walk from where you are. He treats a general population, slaves sent by their masters, freedmen and women who can afford a basic consultation, the occasional wealthier client who hasn't paid for the luxury of a household physician. He is, by the standards of his profession, reasonably competent. He knows his Galen, he knows his Hippocrates, he knows Dioscorides on plants, Soranus on women's medicine. He has accumulated 20 years of clinical observation that sometimes, silently, contradicts what his texts tell him. And in these contradictions he has developed a private pragmatism that he doesn't always share with the texts, but that makes him more effective than a pure theoretician would be. He does not believe that menstrual blood can corrode iron. He has said this to exactly 2 people in his professional life, because the mainstream view is what it is, and contradicting Pliny is not something a practicing physician in Rome does casually. But privately, he has his doubts. You will encounter his professional opinion later today. First, though, the market. Your mother's cough has been going for 3 weeks now, and this morning at breakfast, pulls again, with a little more cheese than yesterday because last night's good delivery means the budget has some play. She coughed through most of it. A wet cough, which is worse than a dry one, a cough that sounds like something in her chest is trying to get out. Your father noticed. He didn't say anything. He looked at you across the table with a slight tightening of his eyes that in your family means, this needs addressing. You are going to the herb sellers at the market near the Forum Boarium. This is a genuine errand, one your father has explicitly assigned, not an excuse for you to wander. Your mother needs medicine. Specifically, your father has asked you to get horehound, which is a bitter herb used for chest complaints, and fennel seed, which she already uses, and if possible some thyme, which is expensive but which your father has decided the budget can sustain for one purchase. 3 items, a list small enough to carry in your head without writing. You wrap up warmly. The morning cold has a particular edge today, the kind of cold that comes with clear sky and no wind, the kind that will soften by midday but that right now is sharp enough to make your eyes water. You tuck the wool shawl tight around you and you go out. The streets of the Aventine in mid-morning are in full operation. The carts are gone now, departed before the 3rd hour as required by the law that limits wheeled vehicle traffic in the daylight city. But everything else is present. The foot traffic of people going to and from their various concerns, the donkeys still allowed even in daylight plodding stoically under their loads, the street vendors with their portable setups that pack up at night and reappear every morning in the same spots as if they've been grown there. You are managing. You walk with the particular, slightly careful gait of someone who's aware of their body in a way they'd rather not be, not limping, nothing externally different, just a very slight conservation of movement that you wouldn't notice unless you knew what you were looking for. The back pain has settled to the mid-range it will maintain for most of the day, not the worst it could be. Present enough to be a constant condition rather than an acute event. The streets slope downward from the Aventine toward the river and the Forum Boreum, and the descent is actually easier on the back than the flat, which is a small mercy. You pick your way through the neighbourhood's familiar geography, the bakery where the woman from the baths works the early shifts, the oil shop with the amphorae stacked outside in rows, the building that's been under some kind of repair for so long that the scaffolding has become part of the architectural character of the block, the fountain at the corner where the morning water fetchers are gathered with their jugs. You used to fetch water here. Before your building got its branch of the public supply, when you were 13 and 14, and it was your morning task. The queue at the fountain in the grey light before the workshop opened. You know every crack in the stone basin. You remember the winter mornings when the air was cold enough that your wet hands hurt. You pass it now without stopping and turn down toward the river. The Forum Boreum is one of the oldest parts of Rome, one of those places in the city where the layers are visible if you know how to look. There are temples here that are ancient even by Roman standards. The round temple of Hercules Victor with its single surviving Corinthian column, visible from halfway down the street, its marble white enough to see from a distance, and the rectangular temple of Portunus beside it, god of harbours and ports, which makes sense given the proximity to the river and the old port installations. These are buildings that were old when your grandparents' grandparents were young. The cattle market itself has been operating here for centuries, though the actual cattle dealing is mostly replaced now by a general commercial zone. The kind of market area where you can buy herbs and dyes and small metal goods and leather items and the 100 small necessities of urban life. The smell changes as you descend toward the river. The city's upper district smell, wood smoke and cooking and animal, gives way to something more complex. The mud smell of the Tiber in the cold season, the particular low water smell of a river in winter when the flow is slower and the banks are exposed. Fishy but not sharply so, muddy in a deep mineral way. The river smell is one of the things about this city that people from outside notice first, and that people who live here stop noticing almost immediately. The herb market occupies a section of the western edge of the Forum Boreum, where the vendors have set up their stalls in a loose cluster, the better to create the impression of concentrated expertise. 3 women and 1 man are selling this morning. You know one of the women. She's been selling herbs at this spot for years, a thin person of indeterminate age with the perpetual faint green staining on her hands of someone who handles plant material constantly. You go to her first. "Whorehound," you say. She reaches without looking to a bunch of dried stems hanging from the bar of her stall. "How much? What will treat a Cheskov for a week?" She holds up the bunch, assessing it, breaks off a portion. The stems crack with the dry snap of well-dried herb, and the smell comes off them immediately, bitter and sharp and medicinal in a way that is unambiguous. This is not a pleasant herb. This is a purpose herb, something you take because you need it, not because you enjoy it. This, she says, boil it in water, strain it, mix with honey if you have it, morning and evening for the cough. How much? The price is fair. You pay it. Fennel seed. Easy. Every herb stall has fennel seed in quantity because it's one of the most commonly used herbs in the city and comes in from farms in the surrounding countryside in sacks. She measures out a portion with her stained hands into a small cloth bag you've brought. Time is more expensive. You knew it would be. It comes from further away from the southern Italian coast and the Greek islands where it grows wild on hillsides and in the city that distance translates to cost. The herb seller shows you two qualities: the finer stems with smaller leaves that came in recently and have more oil in them, and the older stock that's been sitting a while and has some of its volatile oils faded. You take the finer one, because your father said this particular purchase should be done right, and because the volatile oils are where the therapeutic value lives and the cheaper time won't do as much for your mother as the proper article. You think, while you pay, about how you know this. Nobody taught you medical herbalism formally. There are no schools where women learn this. There are physicians who know about plant medicines. Dioscoride's great text on medicinal plants, the De Materia Medica, is the definitive reference. A book of such comprehensive practical usefulness that it will remain in medical use for 1500 years, an astonishing achievement. But Dioscorides' text is for physicians and educated men. You don't have access to it. Most women don't. What you have is what the herb seller just told you. Boil it, strain it, honey if you have it, morning and evening. A practical instruction, passed across a market stall. You have what your mother has told you over years about the herbs she uses. You have what you've observed, watching your mother treat your brother's coughs, and your father's bad back and Sabina's ear infection, watching which plants she reaches for in which circumstances, absorbing the practical pharmacopoeia of a household that can't afford physicians for ordinary ailments and has therefore developed its own. This is also women's knowledge. This also doesn't get written down. You put the herbs in your bag and turn back toward the Aventine. But the Forum Boreum is busy this morning, and busy in a way that makes you alter your route slightly, because there's a disturbance near the main entrance to the old cattle market space. A crowd has gathered, which in Rome means either a street performance or an accident or a political notice being read aloud, any of which will tighten the foot traffic to a standstill if you walk directly into it. You take a different route, which takes you past the building with the medicus. You almost don't stop. You've walked past this building before without stopping. But today there's something that makes you pause, which is that the door is open and you can see, just inside the threshold, a woman sitting on a bench. She's maybe 30, well dressed enough to be comfortably middling in social terms, and she has the specific quality of someone waiting for a consultation, the quality of someone who would rather be anywhere else, but needs something badly enough to be here. She looks at you. You look at her. She looks back into the room beyond. You stand at the threshold for a moment and then, acting on an impulse that you'll later think was your mother's cough, pushing you past your own hesitation, you step inside. The room is small. The physician is at the back at a table covered with objects, bronze instruments, clay jars of various sizes, a stack of wax tablets, a small weighing scale, several bound volumes of text that are clearly heavily used judging by the state of the covers. He's a Greek man, perhaps 50, with a particular intellectual face of someone who spends most of their time reading. Not a fat face or a self-important face, but a thin, focused face. Eyes that move quickly. He looks up. You speak before you can think about whether this is a reasonable thing to do. My mother has a chest cough, you say. 3 weeks. It's getting wetter. He looks at you for a moment with the evaluating look of someone assessing whether a patient's representative is going to be useful or annoying. Sit, he says. Not the woman's bench. He gestures to a stool near his table. You sit. How old is she? 41. Her general constitution? Strong. She works. Wool working. She's been healthy her whole life. Does she have fever? Not that we can tell. The cough. Does it produce matter? You consider. Sometimes thin and clear, mostly. He writes something on a wax tablet. How long since the onset was clearly wet rather than dry? 4 or 5 days? He nods. He asks 3 more questions, each one a bit more technical than the last, each one requiring you to remember specific things about your mother that you've been observing without exactly cataloguing. The quality of her breathing at night, whether she's been short of breath or just coughing, whether she has pain in her chest when she breathes deeply. You can answer all of these because you've been paying attention. He looks at you differently after the 4th question. You've been watching her closely, he says. She's my mother. He almost smiles. It doesn't quite complete, but it starts. He writes out a preparation on a wax tablet. Not whorehound. He specifies elecampane, which he says is more specifically effective for deep chest coughs than whorehound. And he adds to it instructions for a steam treatment using aromatic herbs. He also says the time is correct and to use it. He asks if you have honey. Yes. He says to use plenty of it, not to spare it. He takes a coin for the consultation. Small. Smaller than you expected. You'd brought more, just in case. You start to stand. One more thing, he says. This is said with a particular casualness that you recognise, because this is how people introduce the things they actually want to say, but feel they need to lay groundwork for first. You wait. You're managing something yourself today. He says this carefully, not looking at you, looking at the wax tablet. You say nothing. I'm not observing anything offensive. I'm observing that you're holding yourself in a particular way, and that you've been shifting your weight carefully since you sat down. It's a way I've seen before. You hold very still. I'm a physician, he says. It's my job to observe bodies. I'm not going to embarrass you. I'm telling you something that I tell my female patients when the opportunity arises, which is rarely because most of them don't come to me about this, and their husbands certainly don't bring them for this. He pauses. Heat. Local heat. You probably know this already. Yes. Movement is better than stillness for most women, not all, but most. The Hippocratic texts say rest. My observation doesn't support this as universally correct. He looks up at you. Galen says menstruation is the body expelling excess blood. This is the accepted position. I have some questions about this position that I don't publish, because publishing questions about Galen is not something one does lightly. He says this with a very dry quality that isn't quite humour, but contains an acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. You look at him. What are your questions, you ask. Now he does smile, just slightly. The bodies I've examined, primarily animal bodies, which is what's available for dissection, don't show the excess blood storage mechanism that Galen's theory requires. The anatomy isn't what his description suggests. But I've also observed that female patients with regular menstruation are generally healthier than those whose cycles are disrupted. This fits the expulsion theory, and it fits several other theories that I won't bore you with. He pauses. My point is, the current understanding is imperfect. Most medical understanding is imperfect. The women who manage this best are the women who've learned their own bodies well enough to know what helps them specifically. He looks at the wax tablet. Do you have pain? Today, yes. Manageable. The poppy decoction is effective in small doses for this specific application. I find it's better than most practitioners acknowledge for menstrual pain. A very small amount in well-watered wine, not enough to create the full sedative effect, enough to take the edge off the cramping. Are you familiar with the preparation? You think of the fuller's wife. I've heard mention of it. The fuller's wife from your building knows how to prepare it, he says. You stare at him. She's been a patient of mine for years, he says simply. I told her the same thing. She clearly passed it along. He makes a brief gesture. The knowledge moves the way it has to move when the official channels are inadequate. He looks at you with something that takes you a moment to identify as respect. You asked about my questions, he says. Most people who come here don't ask. They tell me the symptom and wait for me to tell them what to think. Most people aren't interested in the questions. Most people are afraid the answer will be inconvenient. He stands, signalling the consultation is complete. Your mother will be better in a week with those preparations. The elecampane especially. Make sure the steam is hot enough to reach the deep tissue. You take the wax tablet. At the door you turn back. Why do they say it corrodes iron, you ask? The blood. Pliny says it corrodes iron. Do you believe it? A very long pause. No, he says. I don't believe it. I've never observed it. No one I've asked has ever personally observed it. Pliny was a thorough man who repeated a great deal of what others told him without always testing it. He picks up his stylus. But I'd appreciate if you didn't quote me on that. You go back out into the cold morning. The disturbance near the cattle market has resolved itself. The crowd has dispersed. The streets are their ordinary churning selves. You walk home with the herbs and the wax tablet and something new in you, some slight adjustment to the way you're standing inside your own experience, as if a weight has been lifted that you didn't know you were carrying until its absence made itself felt. A physician who doesn't believe Pliny. A physician who said, plainly, in a consultation room in the Forum Boreum, the current understanding is imperfect. The knowledge moves the way it has to move when the official channels are inadequate. You walk home. Your mother takes the wax tablet and reads it, which she can do because your father made sure all his children could read, a decision he made for practical reasons, business records, contracts, and which has turned out to be useful in ways he didn't fully anticipate. She reads it twice. Then she puts it on the shelf and starts preparing the infusion. You don't tell her about the physician. Not yet, not all of it. But you tell her about the elecampane, and she nods in a way that suggests this is information she's heard before but forgotten, a thing returning to usefulness. The morning goes on. Now, let me take you to Greece. Not physically. You're staying in Rome, in your body on the Aventine, dealing with your second day. But I want to tell you about what was happening a few hundred years earlier in the Greek world, because the Greek understanding of this specific subject is both deeply related to and interestingly different from the Roman one, and because some of the things the Greeks did, some of the very specific practical solutions they found, are genuinely remarkable for their time and context. We're talking about ancient Athens primarily, though the Greek world of the classical period extended across the Mediterranean in ways that complicate any single geographic focus. Mainland Greece, the islands, the colonies in Asia Minor and Sicily and southern Italy. These are all different communities with different local practices, and we shouldn't homogenize them. But Athens is where most of the surviving texts come from, and where the best documented practices originate, so Athens is where we mostly go when we go to ancient Greece. In Athens, the medical understanding of menstruation starts with Hippocrates. Not the man himself necessarily. The texts collected under Hippocrates' name were produced over centuries by many different physicians in the tradition he founded. But the Hippocratic corpus, the body of texts that constitutes the foundational document of Greek medicine. The Hippocratic texts are actually somewhat more nuanced about menstruation than later writers like Galen. The Hippocratic view holds that menstruation is the natural and healthy purging of a monthly excess, which is broadly the same theory as Galen's, the excess blood theory. But the Hippocratic texts are more interested in the clinical symptoms and less interested in building a grand philosophical theory about the nature of female inferiority. They're practical texts, written by people who are actually observing patients, and they contain some remarkably specific observations about irregular cycles, about the physical symptoms associated with menstruation, about the conditions that disrupt normal cycling. A Hippocratic text called On the Nature of Women contains the following observation, which is extraordinary for its time, that female athletes who train intensively have disrupted or absent menstrual cycles. This is completely correct. This is a real phenomenon caused by the interplay of body fat percentage, exercise intensity, and hormonal regulation. The Hippocratic observation is accurate. The explanation, that intense exercise burns off the excess blood before it can be expelled normally, is wrong. But the observation is right. This is classical Greek medicine at its best. Excellent observational practice wrapped in a wrong theoretical framework. The practical management in ancient Greece is somewhat better documented than in Rome, partly because some Greek medical texts are more forthcoming about women's bodies, and partly because the sea sponge industry of the Aegean has left some archaeological and textual traces. In Athens, specifically, women who could afford it used sea sponges. The sponges fished from the Mediterranean. From the Aegean specifically, the waters around Rhodes and the coast of Asia Minor where the sponge fishing industry was centred, are the natural bath sponges you might still buy in a craft market today. The soft, yellow, gold, porous Mediterranean sponge. They are extraordinarily absorbent. They are soft. They can be washed and reused indefinitely if cared for properly, and they can be used in a way that is more internally reliable than an external pad of any kind. The evidence for this comes from several fragmentary sources. One is a reference in a comedy by Aristophanes, the 5th century BCE comic playwright, whose works are a treasure trove of incidental detail about Athenian daily life, precisely because comedy pays attention to the things tragedy ignores, to sponges in a context that makes clear they have an application beyond cleaning. Another is references in medical texts to gynækeia, women's things, in relation to sponges. Another is the simple fact that the sponge fishing industry of the Aegean was significantly larger than the demand for cleaning sponges alone would explain. Historians of medicine have proposed that the sea sponge was, in the Greek world, the most sophisticated menstrual technology available, and that it was widely used in coastal communities with access to the Aegean trade. In inland communities, the options were more limited. Wool and linen primarily. Some texts suggest that women used folded cloth held in place by a simple garment arrangement, a kind of early version of the pattern belt system that would persist in various forms for the next 2,000 years. What is consistent across the Greek world, as in the Roman world, is the complete absence of any male-authored text that provides practical instructions for managing menstruation. The male medical authors know about the phenomenon, they theorize about it extensively, but they don't write about what women actually do, because this is below the level of male intellectual engagement with women's bodies. Women's bodies in the Greek medical tradition are interesting as theoretical objects. The philosophy of the female constitution, the question of how reproduction works, the relationship between menstrual blood and pregnancy, but not as practical daily experiences requiring practical daily management. This gap between the theoretical and the practical is one of the defining features of ancient medicine in general, and is particularly acute around anything that primarily concerns women. There is one exception, and it's worth noting. Soranus of Ephesus, who I mentioned earlier, writes in his Gynecology about menstruation in a way that is meaningfully different from most of his contemporaries. He's writing in the early 2nd century CE, so he's a Roman-era Greek physician, and he practices in Rome. But his training is Greek. His framework is the Greek medical tradition, and his gynecology is addressed to the women who might read it as much as to the physicians who might use it. And Soranus does something that almost none of his peers do. He takes seriously the subjective experience of his female patients. He describes menstrual symptoms in terms of how they feel to the person experiencing them. He discusses the variation in experience between women, acknowledging that different women have significantly different experiences of the same physiological process. He recommends interventions based on comfort and relief rather than purely on theoretical grounds. He writes that a woman experiencing severe menstrual pain, dysmenorrhea in modern terms, should lie down in a warm room, have warm compresses applied to the lower abdomen and lower back, drink warm water or herbal decoctions, and if necessary have a physician prescribe an appropriate analgesic. Appropriate analgesic. He uses this phrase, or the Greek equivalent. He means it. He's suggesting that menstrual pain is a genuine medical symptom that deserves treatment, not a theoretical excess to be philosophized about. He is extraordinary in his context. He's also almost entirely forgotten for most of subsequent history, while Galen's theoretical framework, which is much more philosophically ambitious and much less interested in the comfort of female patients, dominates. Why? Because Galen writes more aggressively, more self-promotionally, and in a style that appeals to the systematic theoretical thinking that becomes the dominant mode of medieval and early Renaissance scholarship. Soranus's clinical practicality is harder to teach, harder to build philosophical arguments around, less interesting to the kinds of minds that spend their careers building grand systems. The history of medicine is full of people whose correct observations were forgotten because they weren't interesting enough theoretically, while more theoretically interesting but practically useless ideas survived in texts. But I'm drifting into lecture mode, and the point I actually want to make is this. The Greek world, for all its philosophical sophistication, was no better than Rome at providing structural support for the women managing this monthly challenge. The philosophy was different. The specific superstitions were somewhat different. The available materials were somewhat different. Sponges more accessible, wool similarly available, linen more common than in Rome. But the fundamental situation was the same. Half the population managing a universal experience with no institutional support, no economic infrastructure, and a medical system that was very interested in theorizing about their bodies and not very interested in helping them feel better. Back to Rome. Back to your afternoon. The second day moves through its hours with the particular quality of a day when you're managing physical discomfort while doing everything else that a day requires. The cramps are there, the back is there. The wool strips need changing at mid-afternoon, which requires the same careful management as the morning, the same practiced efficiency, the same navigation of the shared latrina space. You do it, you come back, you keep working. Sabina, working the loom beside you in the afternoon, says nothing about any of this. But at some point in the late afternoon, without preamble, she brings you a cup of warm water with something in it that isn't chamomile, something with a sweeter, more complex smell, something you can't quite identify. You look at the cup. Meadow sweet, she says. The herb, from the Gaul country. We use it for this. She goes back to her loom. You drink it. It has a faint sweetness that's actually pleasant, a warmth that goes directly to the cramping the way the chamomile does, but with something else underneath. Something that in about 20 minutes you realise is a very slight dulling of the edge of the pain, not elimination. The edge dulled. You look at Sabina. My grandmother's remedy, she says, still working the shuttle. Meadowsweet. You think about this later, when the afternoon is done and the workshop is quiet. Meadowsweet, what the Gauls call by their own name, what comes into Roman trade as an imported herbal medicine from the northern territories, contains something that meadowsweet is rich in, a compound that the 19th century will identify and purify and call aspirin, the most widely used analgesic in human history, which a German chemist will synthesize from salicylic acid in 1897, and which will win a Nobel Prize, and which will be in every medicine cabinet in every home in the industrialized world within 50 years, but which has been growing in the meadows of Gaul and being collected and dried and carried south along the trade routes, and being used in cups of warm water by women for whom there was no aspirin yet, for centuries before the Nobel Prize, because the women figured out that it works before anyone understood why. Sabina's grandmother knew. Sabina knows. Now you know. The knowledge moves. Your back eases slightly in the late afternoon. Not gone, slightly eased. The meadowsweet, the warmth, the movement of the day, all of it contributing to the body's slow negotiation with itself. Your mother makes the elecampane infusion as directed on the physician's wax tablet. The smell of it is extraordinary, sharp and aromatic and very slightly pungent. The herbs' oils releasing into the hot water. She drinks it without comment, the way your mother does most things, with a practical acceptance that doesn't require annotation. That evening she doesn't cough at dinner. Once after dinner, briefly, but less than the night before, your father notices. He doesn't say anything about it either. This family. Night comes early in this part of the year, the sun setting well before the 7th hour of the day, and the apartment is lit by lamps by mid-afternoon. The lamp oil is good olive oil, the kind your father buys in quantity because the workshop runs on it. The looms need light when the shutters are closed, which is most of the winter. The smell of burning olive oil is the smell of working evenings, the smell of a family that keeps going after dark because the work requires it. After supper, pulls again. Your family eats pulls most evenings. It's filling and cheap, and Myrto has learned to make it well. Your father does the accounts. He sits at the kitchen table with a wax tablet and a small lamp, and goes through the week's transactions, the purchases and the sales, the outstanding debts and the payments received. He does this every few days. Your mother sometimes sits with him and offers comments when she has them, which is less often than she could because she's learned that your father does his accounts better when he's left to them. You sit by the window. The wool shawl is around your shoulders. The second day is nearly done. And let me stay here for a moment at this particular point in the evening, because there's something I want to tell you about the long view of this. We've been talking about Rome in the 2nd century CE, about Athens in the 5th century BCE, about the gap between male theory and female practice, about the knowledge that moved between women in bath complexes and kitchen tables and herb markets. And I want to tell you that this gap The gap between the official understanding and the practical management will persist for a very long time, not forever, not indefinitely, but much longer than you might expect. The Roman Empire falls in stages across the 4th and 5th centuries CE. The Western Empire collapses in 476 CE under the pressure of the migrations and the internal pressures and the long, slow unravelling that historians argue about in terms of cause and chronology, but that in simple terms meant that the aqueducts stopped being maintained and the roads stopped being repaired, and the complex economic system that supplied goods from one corner of the empire to another stopped functioning. The bath complexes close, one by one, as the fuel to heat them becomes unavailable or unaffordable, as the water supply systems degrade. The baths of the Aventine will close within a couple of generations after your time. The great imperial thermae will last a little longer. But the social institution that provided that warm water and that shared space and that particular environment where women exchanged practical medical knowledge, that goes away. What fills the gap across the medieval period is a complicated mixture. The monastic tradition, particularly in the Christian monasteries of late antiquity and the early medieval period, preserves a significant amount of ancient medical knowledge, including, in some cases, gynecological knowledge that the monks copying it were presumably somewhat uncomfortable with, but that they understood was important enough to preserve. Some of Soranus survives this way, some of the Hippocratic texts. But the practical knowledge, the meadow sweet from Gaul, the poppy decoction, the sea sponge from the Aegean, the specific fold of the wool strip, that's harder to preserve in writing because it was never in writing. It continues to circulate verbally between women through the same channels as always, but the channels change as society changes. In medieval Europe, the herb knowledge goes partly into convent gardens, the great tradition of monastic herbalism, the abbeys that maintained extensive physic gardens for medicinal plants, the abbesses, who were the primary medical practitioners of their communities, preserves and develops plant medicine in ways that include the herbs women need for women's health. Hildegard of Bingen, the 12th century German abbess and polymath, writes extensively about women's health, including menstruation, with a practical specificity that reads as a continuation of the Soranus tradition and feels notably different from the purely theoretical male medical writing of her era. But across the full span of Western history, from your Rome to the 20th century, the structural situation remains fundamentally similar. Women managing a universal biological experience with whatever materials are available, in the absence of economic infrastructure designed to meet the need, supported by knowledge circulated between women in exactly the same informal channels as the fuller's wife talking to you in the bath. The sea sponge continues to be used periodically in coastal communities where it's available. The wool and linen strips continue in various forms as the basic technology across most of Europe and the Mediterranean for most of history. The medieval woman, the Renaissance woman, the woman of the 17th century. Her situation is in many material respects not dramatically different from yours. The shift begins in the 19th century, and it's driven by industrialization rather than by medical understanding. The Civil War in America produces a surplus of bandaging material, cellulose wadding and gauze, that nurses begin using for menstrual purposes because it's far more absorbent than cloth, and because the industrial scale of its production makes it cheap and available. The commercial menstrual pad doesn't develop directly from this, but the seed is planted. The idea that this need can be met by a manufactured product rather than by domestic improvisation. The first commercially available disposable menstrual pads appear in the 1890s, made by Hartmanns in Germany. Kotex, one of the first mass-market American products, appears in 1921, made from the same cellulose wadding technology developed during World War I, which had again produced a surplus of highly absorbent material that nurses had found a secondary application for. If you're listening to this and you're a woman, the disposable menstrual pad has existed as a commercially available product for about as long as there have been talking movies. The tampon, in its modern form, the OB and Tampax variety, doesn't appear until the 1930s. The menstrual cup, which is in some ways a sophisticated plastic descendant of the sea sponge technology, is patented in the 1930s but doesn't become widely adopted until decades later. The entire history of commercially available menstrual products, the entire span from nothing to the fully stocked supermarket aisle, fits within the lifetime of people still alive today, which means that most of human history, this problem was solved the way it was solved in your apartment on the Aventine, with wool, with women's knowledge, with the practical intelligence of people who are given no institutional support and therefore develop their own solutions and pass them between themselves in the unrecorded verbal tradition of domestic life. And the reason this history is so hard to recover is the same reason it was never written down in the first place. It was considered too ordinary to document, too obvious, too bodily, too female. The history of what half the human population dealt with every month for most of human history is invisible not because it was hidden, but because no one with a pen thought it was worth writing about. But it's there, in the fragments, in the sponge fishing records from the Aegean, in the passing references in Aristophanes and Juvenal, in the things Serranus mentions and then moves past, in the meadow sweet tea that Sabina's grandmother knew to make, in the specific fold of the wool strip that your cousin Tertia taught you when you were 14. It's all there, just below the surface of the written record, in the enormous silent life of the women who kept the ancient world running. Now, back to your evening. You're sitting by the window and the lamp oil is burning slowly and the city outside is making its night sounds and your back is not fine, not what you'd call comfortable, but noticeably better than this morning. The meadowsweet, the baths, the movement, the chamomile at dawn. All of it has been working continuously all day. Tomorrow will be lighter. The third day is almost always lighter. The tide of it is turning. Your mother comes to sit beside you for a moment, the way she did last night, with the lamp between you. She looks at you with a particular look that has no content except attention. The look of a person who has spent 17 years watching a person grow, and who watches not because they're looking for something, but because the watching is itself the thing. She coughs once, briefly, and stops. You look at her. Better, she says. One word. The El Campaign, the time. The physician on the Forum Boreum who bothered to think about what actually works. The herb seller with the green-stained hands who knew the preparation. You. Good, you say. And it is. It is good. The night comes on fully now. The lamp in the window casts its small circle of warmth against the dark outside. This city is at its night level, the particular ambient sound that the city maintains even in the hours when most people sleep, because 1 million people never sleep entirely, not all at once, not in a city this size. There are always the watchmen, always the bakers, always the people whose business is darkness. But here, in this room, it's quiet. Your mother goes to bed. Your father finishes his accounts and puts the tablet away and goes to bed. Marcus and Titus have been asleep for an hour already, in the careless, abandoned way of boys who haven't yet acquired the habit of worry. You stay by the window a little longer, and I want to tell you one more thing before sleep, because we've covered a great deal tonight. The wool strips and the sea sponges and the herb market, and the physician who doubts Pliny and the fuller's wife and Sabina's grandmother, and the 2,000 years of women managing this without help. And I want to give you the thread that runs through all of it, the thing that connects these women across the centuries. They adapted. That's it. That's the thread. Every time their society gave them a problem without a solution, and women's societies gave them this problem, this specific one, every month without fail, they adapted. They found what was available. They tested what helped and discarded what didn't. They told each other. They refined the solutions. They passed the knowledge along from mother to daughter, from neighbour to neighbour, from the woman at the bath to the woman at the market. They were not, any of them, exceptional. That's the point. They were Valeria, 17, on the Aventine sitting by a lamp. They were the fuller's wife with her practical 3-word recommendation. They were Sabina with her Gallic grandmother's meadow sweet. They were the Greek woman in the Athenian Gynaeconitis with her sea sponge from the Aegean trade. They were the medieval abbess documenting which plants help with what. They were the Civil War nurse who noticed the cellulose wadding worked better than cloth. Ordinary women solving ordinary problems in the ordinary ways available to them. The fact that this history is hard to find doesn't mean it's not there. It's there in the gap between what the men wrote and what the world actually was. You look out at the city. The moon is up now, high enough that it's clearing the roof line of the building across the alley, the cold silver light of a late winter moon in Rome. By this light you can see the shapes of things rather than their details, the outline of the Temple of Diana's precinct against the sky, the dark mass of the apartment buildings stacked against each other, the river invisible in the distance but present in the quality of the air. You'll go to the temple in a few days. You'll make your offering. Diana will receive it, the way she receives everything that women bring her when they can come. The wheel turns, the moon goes through its phases, the body follows its rhythms, all of it connected, all of it moving together. You think, I have been managing this for 3 years, and I will manage it for 30 more, and in 30 years I will tell my daughter, if I have daughters, and you do, eventually 2 of them, what my cousin told me, and what the fuller's wife told me, and what Sabina's grandmother knew, and what the physician said about the official understanding being imperfect. I will tell them what I know. The knowledge will move. It has been moving for centuries before me, and will move for centuries after. And now, here, tonight, you are part of that movement. That particular human chain of women telling women what helps. That is not nothing. That is, in its way, a kind of civilization. Not the civilization of marble temples and legal codes and aqueducts. The other one, the one that ran alongside it, quiet, unwritten, continuous, and real. You get up from the window. The lamp is burning low, the oil nearly gone. You don't refill it. It'll burn out on its own, and that's fine. You'll wake to darkness and deal with the morning when it comes. The sleeping mat is where you left it. You lie down. 3rd day tomorrow. Lighter. Your back settles as you lie flat. The particular relief of horizontal after a full day upright. The body unloading itself from the work of maintaining posture and locomotion, and all the small physical negotiations the day required. The mat accepts your weight. The blanket comes up around you. The cramping has backed off to a distant murmur, present but quiet, like a sound in another room. The city is doing what it does. The moon is crossing the roofline toward the west. And here, in this specific moment, in a Rome that will be dust and archaeology, and the source material of 10,000 doctoral dissertations, in a body that will live for another 40 or 50 years, doing the ordinary, extraordinary work of staying alive and making cloth, and raising children and keeping knowledge moving. Here, right now, you're completely and specifically yourself. Not the idea of an ancient Roman woman, not the theoretical female of Galen's excess blood theory, not the dangerous impure figure of Pliny's superstition. Just you. 17 years old, second day, lying in the dark with the city breathing around you, and your mother's cough less bad than it was this morning, and the wool strips hanging dry in the chest, and tomorrow's work already half organised in your mind. You are warm enough. You're safe enough. You have done everything that needed doing today, and that includes the things that nobody will write down and nobody will credit and nobody centuries from now will recover from any text, because the text won't contain them. But you did them. That's enough. The lamp goes out. Darkness. The sounds of Rome at its night depth wash over you. The footsteps of the watchman on his round, the distant barking of a dog somewhere in the valley below, the faint sound of the river if you're listening for it, the creak of the building settling in the cold. Your breathing slows. The world of tomorrow, the third day, the lighter day, the herbs to check and the loom to return to, and the physician's instructions to continue following for your mother's cough. All of that is real and waiting, and will arrive whether you worry about it or not. So let it wait. Let the morning come when it comes. Let the city keep turning. Let your body do what it does, which is rest, which is the one thing it needs from you right now, and which you are very good at, finally, after the whole complicated managed day of being this specific person in this specific time. The blanket is warm. The mat is familiar. The city is a low murmur at the edge of hearing. And the moon is finishing its crossing of the sky, moving toward the western hills, moving the way it always moves, the way it moved when your grandmother's grandmother lay down in a different bed in a different city and felt the same warmth of a wool blanket and heard her city's particular nighttime sounds. The same moon, the same rhythm, the same body, different women, all of them managing, all of them resting when the managing was done for the day, all of them passing what they knew forward into the dark of the future, trusting it would reach whoever needed it. It reached you. Now let sleep come. Let it come the way the morning comes, not hurried, not announced, just gradually present, arriving at the edges of consciousness and moving inward until there's nothing left outside of it. You're warm enough, you're done enough, you're safe enough. The day has been what it has been. Tomorrow will be what it will be. And right now, in this last small piece of tonight, you don't need to be anything at all except a person in the dark, breathing. So breathe. The sounds of Rome fade, or you fade from them. It amounts to the same thing. Centuries from now, and when I say centuries I mean many of them, more than you can conceptualize lying in your attic room on the Aventine, centuries so many that the whole Roman world you know will be a ruin, and then an excavation, and then a museum. People will live in this city. They will walk above the level where you are now sleeping. The streets will be higher. Rome builds on its own debris. the layers accumulating until the level of the ancient street is meters below the level of the modern one. They'll walk over where you were, where the workshop is, where the herb market stood, where the physician's consultation room sat beside the forum boreum. They will walk above it all, and they will not know you are here. But the city will still be here. The river will still be here. The moon will still cross the sky at the same angle it crosses it tonight. And women will still, every month, be doing the invisible logistics of managing what their bodies require in whatever way their particular moment in history has made available. Different materials, different understanding, much better understanding. Eventually, the theories will finally catch up to what women always knew experientially. Different social context, different levels of acknowledgement and support, but the same fundamental human business of a body doing what it does and a person adapting to it. The same thread, still moving. You are part of it tonight. A 17th century girl in a room on the Aventine in Rome, 2,000 years ago, part of a thread of women's practical knowledge and women's daily management and women's quiet, extraordinary competence that stretches from before Rome to beyond the fall of Rome and through the medieval centuries and into the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the Industrial Age and every technological moment that follows. The thread holds. It has always held. It holds tonight. Sleep now. The second day is done. The third will be easier. You've earned this rest. Good night.